In this lesson, we're going to finish off our sprite animation script. Alright, so let's jump right back into it. In the last lesson, we had got the time working, and we also have our animation frames and animation IDs all set up. Now what we want to do is we want to get the behavior that we want out of our offset. Okay, and then we'll start hooking up the different animations. So to get started with this, what is the behavior that we want out of this exactly? Well, we've already explained this a little bit. The current frame is going to be set at 1. And so it's going to offset every single frame, okay, based on those frame IDs. And once it gets to frame 8, or once it gets to the max amount in the columns, I want it to drop down a row. Now, as it sits right now in our code, it would continue to offset, and once it gets to 8, it's going to return back here at the beginning and stay on the same row. But what I want it to do is, once it reaches the end, I want it to start down here and then move across. So to get this functionality, we need to go into MonoDevelop, and right here below our time, we're going to create a variable really quickly, and we're going to use that frame position. So we're going to say frame position dot y equals 1. Now the reason that we're setting this is because we want it to start in a specific position. All right. And then now we're going to use a for loop. So while this play animation function is running, we're going to have this loop running. And what it's going to do is it's going to search, and if we've hit the end of the columns, it's going to reduce the number of rows. So we're going to say for I, and we're going to set this equal to the current frame, so whatever frame we're on at the time. And then we're going to give it the condition, so if I is greater than columns, okay, so that's exactly what we said. So if, let's go into Photoshop really quick. So if the number I, or the number that's represented by the variable I is greater than the columns number, which is 8, we want it to do what? We don't want it to continue on or restart. We want it to drop down a row. So that's what we're going to do here. So on the next part, we're going to say I minus equals rows. All right. And then inside of this for loop, we want to be able to get out of the loop if we need to. And so in here, we're going to say frame position dot y plus equals 1. Okay, so that's going to physically move the frame position down 1 in the y. So we've reduced the number of rows, and now we're taking the frame position variable and moving it down. All right, great. Now, below this, we need to adjust the frame position in the x direction. So once we start going through this for loop, we're going to say frame position dot x equals the variable of I minus 1. All right. So that's going to continue moving over in our offset. All right, so now what do? How do we get this tied to our offset? Well, we have to replace the values we've put in here. So right now we've been saying the sprite sheet, which is represented by the number of 1.0 divided by columns, and that gives us the offset number of 0.125. Now we want it to offset based on the frame's position, so frame position dot x value, and then divide that by columns, and then in our y direction we want it to take the frame position dot y and divide that by rows. So frame position dot y divided by rows. Now, one thing that I want you to remember, whenever we went into Unity and we started adjusting the offset, remember where it started out. It started down here on the bottom left corner. And that's not where we wanted to start at 1. We wanted to start up here at 1. And so to do that, what we need to do is we need to just reverse the number. We don't want to put a negative number in here. That will give us the value, but it will also flip our texture. And we don't want that. So instead, I'm going to say 1.0f minus the value that we get from frame position.y and rows. So with that, let's go ahead and hit save. And let's go into Unity. And we're probably going to get an error here. It's saying that I does not exist in the current context. Perfectly normal. It just means that we need to declare that variable. Now normally I would say int I right down here, but it's going to be a little bit easier if I just go ahead and bring it up here. So I'm going to put this under my animation control variables. And I'm going to say private or int I, and then end with a semicolon. So that way it knows what to do with it. Okay, so that's all working. And now if I hit play, notice what's happening. Our offset is changing, and then once it reaches the end, it's starting over. So it's going across the animation, or the explosion animation. Once it reaches the end, it goes down one row. So we're cycling through this entire sprite sheet here. So this is working perfectly. So now what we need to do is we need to tie in the actual animation IDs and the animation frames. So let's go ahead and get started on that. Inside of MonoDevelop, we want to come up here to our update function. So in the update function, I wanted to do one thing. I wanted to handle the animation, but it needs to do two things. It needs to play the animation, and then it needs to find the animation that should be playing at this time. So in my update function, I'm going to go ahead and put in just one new function. And I'm going to call this handle animation. Open, close, paren, and then end with a semicolon. Now, with that, I'm calling it, but I don't actually have a function defined called handle animation. So let's create it, and we're going to call it handle animation, open, close, paren, and then open, close, curly brackets. Now, what is the handle animation function supposed to do? Well, it's going to call the play animation function, so let's cut it from the update and paste it here, so Control V. And then I also want it to find my animation, so I'm going to call another function. Now this one we haven't created yet either. So let's go ahead and create this function. So we're going to say void find animation, open, close, paren, or open, close brackets, or parentheses, and then open, close, curly brackets. And then what do we want it to do in the find animation function? Well, in here, what I want it to do is, based on a key press, I want it to set my animation. So just really quickly, let's do a quick test. So let's say if input.getAxis is vertical, and if that is greater than 0.0f, so if we're pressing the W key or the up arrow key, let's set the current animation. So current anim, and actually I don't have this variable yet, so let's create that. Let's see, current, let's put it below this. So let's say public, and it's going to be an int, current anim, and we're going to set this equal to, by default, let's see, let's think about this. What do we want to set it to by default? Let's go ahead and do 1, or no, let's just do 0. I believe 0 is the idle animation. Yes. So we're going to set that to 0 to start out. All right, so now current animation equals what? So whenever we're pressing that W key, current animation should equal anim drive, and then end with a semicolon. Now with the if statement, I'm going to say else. So if nothing else is pressed, what do we want it to do? Let's just say set current animation back to anim idle. So current anim equals anim idle. End semicolon. Okay. So let's hit save, and let's go into Unity, and saying handle animation does not exist. So let's take a look at this really quickly. Looks like we may have something misspelled. Yep, right here. Handle animation. Now let's go ahead and go back into Unity. And we're going to get these warnings saying that it doesn't know what to do with these values because they're not assigned and never used. That's okay. We're going to take care of that later. So now you can see that it's cycling through the animations, but something is wrong here. It's cycling through, and it's not waiting on any key presses of any kind. And so what we're going to do is we're going to debug this problem in our next lesson, and we're going to finish up the sprite animation by setting up all the animations that we need for our car. And we're going to make it a little more user-friendly. So I'll see you then.